The rain lashed against the wrought iron gates of the sprawling Surrey estate as the bride collapsed into the mud, her custom silk gown completely ruined. Her billionaire mother-in-law had just ordered security to throw her out like trash, leaving the groom standing silently by. They thought they had finally disposed of the penniless gold digger who dared to infiltrate their dynasty. They were wrong. Within 20 minutes, the deafening rumble of a military-grade helicopter and a convoy of armored SUVs bearing the crest of the royal household would show the Pendletons exactly who they had just messed with. To the outside world, the engagement of Arthur Pendleton and Eleanor Hastings was a modern-day fairy tale, a real-life Cinderella story splashed across the pages of Tatler and Vanity Fair. Arthur was the golden-haired heir to Pendleton Holdings, a ruthless real estate empire that owned half of Mayfair and vast swathes of commercial property across Europe. His family was old money mixed with new-age corporate brutality. His mother, Victoria Pendleton, was a fixture of London's elite high society, a woman who wielded her influence like a stiletto blade, and whose approval could make or break a socialite's career. Eleanor, on the other hand, was a ghost in their glittering world. She was an art restorer working in a quiet, dusty gallery in Chelsea. Raised by a single mother who had passed away 3 years prior, Eleanor lived a modest, profoundly private life. Her mother, Beatrice, had always insisted on keeping a low profile, living in a small cottage in the Cotswolds before moving to a modest flat in London. Beatrice had left Eleanor with very little: a collection of classic literature, a strict sense of unshakable morals, and a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a crest that Eleanor had never been able to identify. "Never show this to anyone unless your life depends on it," her mother had warned her on her deathbed. Eleanor had thought it was just the rambling of a dying woman and kept the ring hidden in a locked mahogany box under her bed. Arthur and Eleanor had met organically, away from the watchful, judgmental eyes of his family. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Arthur had been trying to escape a grueling board meeting, and Eleanor had been sketching in the medieval wing. He was captivated by her serenity, her lack of pretense, and the way she didn't care about the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist or the bespoke Savile Row suit he wore. For 6 months, they kept their romance a secret. For 6 months, Arthur was just Arthur, and Elena was entirely happy. But secrets in London's upper echelon have a short shelf life. When Arthur finally brought Eleanor home to the Pendleton estate, a colossal, sprawling manor in Surrey, surrounded by manicured gardens and high-security walls, the fairy tale abruptly ended and the psychological warfare began. Victoria Pendleton took one look at Eleanor's off-the-rack Zara dress and immediately categorized her as a threat. In Victoria's eyes, marriage was not a union of souls. It was a corporate merger. She had already selected the perfect bride for Arthur. Vivian Wentworth. Vivian was the daughter of a billionaire shipping magnate, a woman who bled Chanel, spoke in passive-aggressive riddles, and looked at Eleanor like she was something scraped off the bottom of a luxury yacht. From day one, the microaggressions were relentless. At family dinners, Victoria would deliberately serve shellfish, knowing Eleanor was highly allergic. Feigning innocence, with a cold, tight smile. "Oh, darling, I completely forgot. I suppose you can just eat the side salad. It's what you girls do to stay thin anyway, isn't it?" Arthur, to his credit, would sometimes intervene, but his defenses were always weak, always carefully worded, so as not to truly anger his mother. "Mother, please, she told you last week," he would mutter before changing the subject. Eleanor endured it all because she loved Arthur. She truly believed that once they were married, once they had their own home, away from the suffocating grip of the Pendleton matriarch, things would change. But as the wedding date approached, Victoria's tactics escalated from subtle snubs to blatant humiliation. Victoria insisted on controlling every aspect of the wedding, transforming what Eleanor wanted to be a small, intimate ceremony in a historic chapel into a £3 million circus at the Pendleton estate, complete with 500 guests, media coverage, and corporate sponsors. Eleanor was essentially reduced to a prop in her own wedding. The most glaring red flag came a month before the ceremony. Eleanor was summoned to the Pendleton family lawyers in the City of London. There, surrounded by men in dark suits, Victoria slid a 70-page prenuptial agreement across the mahogany table. It wasn't just a document protecting Arthur's assets. It was a deeply insulting contract. It stipulated that Eleanor would receive absolutely nothing in the event of a divorce, demanded she maintain a specific body weight, and required her to forfeit custody of any future children if the marriage dissolved. "Sign it, Eleanor." Victoria had purred, sipping sparkling water. "It's standard procedure, unless of course you're only here for my son's money." Eleanor had looked at Arthur, expecting him to tear the document up. Instead, Arthur looked at his shoes, running a hand through his hair. It's just legal mumbo-jumbo. My father insists. Just sign it so we can move on." Despite the crushing weight of disappointment, Eleanor signed it. She wanted to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she didn't want their billions. She only wanted the man she fell in love with at the museum. But looking back, she would later realize that by signing that document, she had shown Victoria that she could be bullied. And bullies, when given an inch, will always take a mile. The eve of the wedding was a spectacle of obscene wealth. The rehearsal dinner was held in the Lancaster Ballroom at the Savoy in London. The room was dripping in crystal chandeliers, thousands of imported white orchids, and a guest list that read like a who's who of European high society. Members of Parliament, hedge fund managers, and aristocrats mingled, sipping vintage Dom Perignon. Eleanor felt entirely out of place in her simple, elegant silk gown. Vivian Wentworth, of course, had been invited by Victoria and was wearing a diamond-encrusted dress that cost more than Eleanor's entire annual salary. Vivian spent the evening hovering around Arthur, laughing too loudly at his jokes, lightly touching his arm, and whispering inside jokes that excluded Eleanor entirely. The tension in Eleanor's chest was unbearable, but she pasted on, a smile playing the gracious bride-to-be. She just had to survive this night. Tomorrow she and Arthur would be married, and they were scheduled to leave for a month-long honeymoon in the Maldives, far away from Victoria and Vivian. But Victoria Pendleton had not spent millions on this wedding just to let her son marry a commoner. She had orchestrated a masterstroke to completely annihilate Eleanor's reputation, ensuring Arthur would have no choice but to call off the wedding. Halfway through the decadent 5-course meal, the string quartet suddenly stopped playing. Victoria stood at the head of the main table, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The room of 200 elites fell completely silent. "Family and esteemed guests," Victoria began, her voice carrying a theatrical tremor. "I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but a grave matter has just been brought to my attention." Arthur frowned, looking up from his plate. "Mother." "What is it?" Victoria placed a hand dramatically over her heart. "The Pendleton rose diamond. The necklace that has been in our family for 4 generations, the one I intended to gift to Arthur's bride tomorrow, is missing from my private suite upstairs." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The Pendleton rose diamond was legendary, a rare pink diamond necklace insured for over £8 million. Eleanor felt a cold dread wash over her. She knew instantly, with terrifying clarity, that this was a setup. "I have already spoken to hotel security." Victoria continued, her eyes locking directly onto Eleanor, like a predator zeroing in on a wounded deer. "Only a handful of people had access to my suite today. Family, and those trying to become family." "Mother, stop this." Arthur said, his voice tense, but incredibly low. "You mislaid it. Let's not do this here." "I did not mislay it, Arthur." Victoria snapped her mask of sorrow, dropping to reveal pure ice. "And I will not have a thief marry into this family. I demand that all bags belonging to those who were in my suite today be searched, immediately." Before Arthur could object, if he even intended to, hotel security, accompanied by 2 of the Pendletons' private bodyguards, entered the room. Vivian Wentworth, seated nearby, eagerly handed over her glittering clutch. "Of course, Mrs. Pendleton. We must find it." The guards checked Vivian's bag, then Caroline's Arthur's sister, finding nothing. Then, the head of security stepped up behind Eleanor's chair. "Miss Hastings, your bag, please." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She knew she hadn't taken it, but the sickening realization of what was happening paralyzed her. She slowly pushed her small, velvet clutch across the table. The guard opened it. He reached inside past her lipstick and phone. His fingers closed around something wrapped in a small velvet pouch. He pulled it out, untied the strings, and the massive, glittering pink diamond cascaded into his palm, catching the light of the chandeliers. The ballroom erupted into chaotic whispers. Some guests literally gasped, pointing at Eleanor. I didn't take that," Eleanor stammered, standing up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "I swear to God I didn't. Someone must have put it in there." Victoria let out a dry, venomous laugh. "A classic defense from a common thief. You couldn't wait until the ink was dry on the marriage certificate, could you, Eleanor? You saw an £8 million diamond and your true colors showed." "Arthur, please," Eleanor begged, turning to the man she loved. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "You know me. You know I would never do this. Vivian was near my bag all night. She bumped into my chair earlier." Vivian gasped in faux outrage. "Are you accusing me, you pathetic little gold digger?" Eleanor gripped Arthur's sleeve. "Arthur, tell them. Defend me." Arthur looked at the diamond in the guard's hand. He looked at the hundreds of wealthy, influential guests staring at him with pity and mockery. He looked at his mother, whose expression was a terrifying mix of triumph and iron will. Finally, Arthur looked down at Eleanor's hand on his sleeve and gently but firmly pried her fingers off. "Eleanor," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling with cowardice. "It was in your bag. Let's just figure this out quietly upstairs. Don't make a scene." He didn't believe her. Or worse, he did believe her, but he was too terrified of the public scandal and his mother's wrath to stand by her side. In that singular, devastating moment, Eleanor's love for Arthur died. The man she thought she knew, the kind gentleman from the museum, was an illusion. He was just a boy, bought and paid for by the Pendleton Empire. "There will be no figuring it out," Arthur's son Victoria announced loudly. "She is a thief. I will not call the police to spare our family the absolute disgrace of a public trial. But the wedding is off." Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. The betrayal was so absolute, so deep, it bypassed sorrow and crystallized into a freezing, hollow numbness. Without another word, Eleanor turned her back on the whispering crowd, walked out of the ballroom, and took a taxi back to the Pendleton estate, where all her belongings were still kept in the bridal suite. She packed her small suitcase in the dark, intending to leave at first light. Morning broke with a relentless, driving rainstorm. Eleanor hadn't slept a wink. She sat by the massive bay window of the bridal suite at the Pendleton estate, watching the rain batter the glass. Her wedding dress, a custom silk A-line gown she had spent her life savings on, hung on a velvet mannequin in the corner, a cruel mockery of a future that no longer existed. At 7 a.m., the heavy oak door to her suite swung open without a knock. Victoria Pendleton walked in, flanked by 3 enormous stone-faced private security guards in black suits. Behind them stood Vivian Wentworth, holding a cup of coffee and wearing a smug, victorious smile. "You're still here," Victoria sneered, looking at Eleanor's packed suitcase. "I assumed trash usually took itself out." Eleanor stood up, her spine perfectly straight. She refused to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I am leaving, Victoria." "You won. You got what you wanted." "Not quite," Victoria said. She snapped her fingers and one of the guards handed her a manila folder. Victoria tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "This is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. It states that you will never speak of Arthur, this family, or last night's incident to any member of the press. In exchange, there is a cashier's check for £100,000 inside. Generous, considering I should have you arrested." Eleanor looked at the folder, then back up at Victoria. "I don't want your money, and I'm not signing anything." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You will sign it, you insolent little brat, or I will ensure you never work in London again. I will drag your name through the mud until you are unemployable, destitute, and begging on the streets. "Do your worst," Eleanor said, her voice eerily calm. She reached for the handle of her suitcase. "Now get out of my way." Vivian laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Who do you think you are talking to, Eleanor? You're nobody. You're dirt. Mrs. Pendleton want me to have the guards throw her out." "Yes," Victoria barked, her patience entirely evaporated. "Remove her from my property, now, and confiscate that suitcase. God knows what else she's stolen from this house." "Wait, my clothes are in there. My mother's things," Eleanor shouted as one of the massive guards ripped the suitcase from her grip. Before she could fight back, the other two guards grabbed her by the arms. Their grips were like iron vices, bruising her skin. Eleanor struggled violently, kicking and twisting. "Let go of me, I can walk out myself, Arthur." She screamed for him, a final desperate test to see if a shred of the man she loved still existed. As the guards dragged her down the sweeping grand staircase, she saw Arthur standing on the second-floor landing. He was wearing his silk dressing gown. He looked down at her as she was physically hauled toward the front doors. Their eyes met for 3 long seconds. Arthur looked away and retreated into his bedroom, closing the door behind him. The betrayal was complete. The guards dragged Eleanor through the grand foyer, shoved open the massive oak front doors, and hauled her out into the freezing, torrential rain. She fought wildly as they dragged her down the long gravel driveway toward the estate's wrought iron security gates. "My bag, please, my mother's box is in there," she cried out. The wooden mahogany box containing her mother's ring was the only thing of real value she owned. One of the guards tossed her velvet clutch, the one from the night before, into the mud. "Your purse. The suitcase stays per Mrs. Pendleton's orders. Now stay off the property, or the next time we grab you, we won't be so gentle." They threw her roughly onto the wet tarmac outside the gates. Eleanor landed hard on her hands and knees, tearing the skin, her modest clothes instantly soaked in freezing mud. The massive iron gates slammed shut and locked with a heavy electronic clank. Eleanor knelt in the mud, gasping for breath, the icy rain matting her hair to her face. She was stranded in the middle of Surrey, miles from the nearest train station, with no luggage, no coat, and a phone battery rapidly dying. She was utterly alone, broken, and discarded. She looked up at the sprawling Pendleton Manor in the distance. The absolute arrogance of it, the cruelty. They had stripped her of her dignity, her fiancé, and now the last remaining mementos of her dead mother. A dark, unfamiliar fire ignited in Eleanor's chest. The sadness vanished, replaced by an incandescent, terrifying rage. With shaking, muddy hands, she unzipped her small clutch. Her phone was still there. She wiped the wet screen on her sleeve and unlocked it. She bypassed all her normal contacts and opened her hidden photos app, scrolling to a picture she had taken years ago of a dusty, ancient Rolodex card her mother had kept hidden. It contained a single international phone number and a name, Lord Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Blackwood. "Wait," her mother had told her. "If you are ever in true peril, if you are ever pushed to the very edge of the earth, with nowhere left to turn, call this number. Tell them you are Beatrice's daughter. Tell them it is time." Eleanor's hands shook as she dialed the encrypted international number. The line rang once, twice. On the third ring, a crisp, deeply authoritative voice answered. "Protocol 7 secure line. State your designation." Eleanor swallowed hard, the freezing rain pouring down her face. "My name is Eleanor Hastings. My mother was Beatrice Hastings." She paused, remembering the crest on the ring she had locked in the confiscated suitcase. "Oh, her birth name was Lady Beatrice of the Royal House of Oakhaven. I am her daughter, and I need help." There was a dead, heavy silence on the line. For a terrifying second, Eleanor thought they had hung up. Then the voice returned, completely changed. The crisp military edge was replaced by an awe-struck, hurried reverence. "Your Royal Highness, we have been searching for you and your mother for 22 years. What is your exact location?" "I am outside the gates of the Pendleton estate in Surrey," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "Stay exactly where you are, Your Highness. Do not move. The vanguard is inbound." The line went dead. Eleanor lowered the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know exactly what the Vanguard was, but as she sat in the mud, staring at the imposing gates of the family that had just tried to destroy her, she wiped the dirt from her face. She wasn't just Eleanor the art restorer anymore, and the Pendletons were about to find out that there is always a bigger fish in the pond. 20 minutes later, the low thumping roar of helicopter blades shattered the quiet of the Surrey countryside. The deafening rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of rotor blades violently tore through the heavy Surrey rain. Eleanor remained on her knees in the mud, staring upward as a massive slate-gray Augusta Westland AW-101 helicopter descended from the stormy sky. It wasn't a civilian aircraft. It bore no corporate logos, only a sleek, highly classified military exterior with a discreet gold crest emblazoned on the tail. The downdraft whipped the gravel into a frenzy, flattening the manicured rose bushes along the Pendleton estate's outer wall. Before the helicopter's wheels even touched the tarmac of the private access road, the side doors slid open. 4 men in tactical black gear, bearing the same gold crest on their shoulders, dropped to the ground. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, forming a diamond perimeter around Eleanor, their hands resting on the holsters of concealed firearms. A moment later, a convoy of 4 pitch-black Range Rover Sentinel Edition's armored vehicles, typically reserved for heads of state, screeched around the bend of the country lane, completely blocking the road. Their heavy tires chewed up the wet asphalt as they boxed in the front gates of the estate. The rear door of the lead Range Rover opened. An older man stepped out into the freezing downpour. He was immaculately dressed in a bespoke charcoal Jeeves and Hawks suit, completely unbothered by the rain soaking his silver hair. This was Lord Alexander Cavendish. He walked past the tactical guards, his eyes fixed entirely on Eleanor. When he reached her, this powerful, imposing man did something that made Eleanor's breath hitch in her throat. He dropped to one knee, right there in the freezing mud, bowing his head deeply. "Your Royal Highness," Lord Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly over the idling helicopter engines. "Forgive us for the delay. The Vanguard is here." Eleanor shivered violently, hugging her arms around her chest. Her silk dress was stained brown and ruined. Her hair was plastered to her face. I don't understand," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "Royal Highness, I'm an art restorer. My mother was Beatrice." "Your mother?" Lord Alexander interrupted gently, standing up and unbuttoning his heavy cashmere overcoat. "Was Her Serene Highness, Crown Princess Beatrice of the Sovereign Duchy of Oakhaven, the sole heir to a dynasty that predates the British monarchy and a sovereign wealth fund that eclipses the GDP of half of Europe. She vanished 22 years ago to escape an arranged marriage and a life she could not bear. We never stopped looking for her, or you." He draped the warm, dry cashmere coat over Eleanor's trembling shoulders. The scent of cedar and expensive cologne enveloped her. "Oakhaven," Eleanor whispered, "the independent, fiercely private trillion-dollar European microstate nestled between the Alps and the Mediterranean. The stories were legendary. Old money, so vast and powerful, it dictated global markets from the shadows. And her mother, who had coupon-clipped to buy Eleanor's school shoes, was its crown princess. The reigning duke, your grandfather, passed away 3 days ago." Lord Alexander continued, his tone turning somber. "Which means, Eleanor, you are no longer just a citizen. You are the ruling Duchess of Oakhaven. You have full diplomatic immunity, sovereign authority, and the absolute loyalty of the Vanguard, the elite Royal Protection Command." Eleanor looked down at her muddy, bleeding hands. She looked back at the towering iron gates of the Pendleton estate, the family that had just mocked her poverty, the family that had dragged her out like garbage. A profound, icy calm washed over her. The frightened, heartbroken girl who had begged Arthur for help died right there on the wet asphalt. When Eleanor raised her head, her eyes were hard as flint. "Lord Alexander," Eleanor said, her voice steadying, devoid of any warmth. "They confiscated my suitcase. Inside it is a locked mahogany box. It contains my mother's signet ring. Lord Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned to the imposing man, leading the tactical detail. Commander Harrison, Her Grace requires her belongings. Of course, my lord, Commander Harrison said, stepping forward. He looked at the massive, electronically locked, wrought iron gates of the Pendleton estate. Shall we request entry? Eleanor pulled the cashmere coat tighter around herself, staring through the iron bars at the sprawling mansion in the distance. No, Eleanor said coldly. Take the gates off their hinges. Inside the Pendleton Manor, the atmosphere was one of triumphant relief. In the grand drawing room, Victoria Pendleton sat by a roaring marble fireplace, sipping a fresh cup of Jamaican blue mountain coffee. Vivian Wentworth lounged on a velvet Chesterfield sofa opposite her, scrolling through her phone. I must admit, Victoria, Vivian purred, that was executed flawlessly. The diamond in the clutch brilliant. Victoria smirked, waving a dismissive hand. It was necessary, Vivian. Arthur is soft. He needed to be shown that the girl was a liability. She simply didn't belong in our hemisphere. By tomorrow, this little hiccup will be forgotten, and we can begin planning your engagement. Arthur was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of neat Macallan whiskey. He looked pale, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Did you really have to have the guards physically throw her mother? It was entirely undignified. Oh, stop whining, Arthur, Victoria snapped. She was hysterical. We are the Pendletons. We do not negotiate with emotional terrorists, nor do we let gold diggers linger. She has been neutralized. She has nothing, and she is nobody. At that exact moment, the house literally shook. A horrific screeching sound of tearing metal violently echoed across the estate, followed by a thunderous crash that rattled the crystal decanters on Victoria's bar cart. What on earth was that? Victoria gasped, spilling hot coffee onto her silk trousers. Outside, the two Pendleton private security guards who had thrown Eleanor out were sprinting down the driveway, completely panicked. But they stopped dead in their tracks as the massive wrought iron gates, weighing 3 tons each, were violently ripped open by tow cables attached to the rear of the armored Range Rovers. The electronic locking mechanism sparked and smoked as the heavy iron was dragged aside like cheap tin. Before the Pendleton guards could even draw their radios, laser sights painted their chests. Commander Harrison and his vanguard operatives swarmed the driveway, heavily armed and moving in absolute, lethal silence. The 4 Range Rovers accelerated up the sweeping gravel driveway, coming to a sharp, synchronized halt directly in front of the manor's grand entrance. Inside the drawing room, Arthur dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor. Mother, there are armed men swarming the front lawn. Military vehicles. What? Victoria marched to the window, her face draining of color as she saw the terrifying display of tactical dominance outside her front door. How dare they? This is private property. Where is our security? Her question was answered when the heavy mahogany front doors of the mansion were kicked open with such force that they banged against the interior walls. 6 Vanguard operatives flooded the grand foyer, instantly securing the perimeter. They bypassed the Pendleton estate's sophisticated alarm system in seconds. Victoria Pendleton stormed out of the drawing room into the foyer, her face twisted in aristocratic fury. What is the meaning of this? I am personal friends with the Commissioner of Scotland Yard. I will have every single one of you arrested for armed trespassing and terrorism. You will do absolutely nothing, Mrs. Pendleton. A crisp, commanding voice echoed through the hall. Lord Alexander Cavendish stepped through the doorway flanking the entrance. He stood tall, projecting an aura of immense, unshakable power that made Victoria's billionaire arrogance suddenly feel very small. But it wasn't Lord Alexander that made Victoria freeze, and it wasn't the armed guards that made Arthur stop breathing. It was the woman who walked in right behind them. Eleanor stepped into the grand foyer. She was still covered in mud, but she wore a multi-thousand-pound cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. She was flanked by 2 royal protection officers who shadowed her every move. She didn't look like a defeated, heartbroken girl anymore. She looked like a conqueror stepping into a besieged castle. Eleanor, Arthur whispered, completely bewildered, stepping out of the drawing room. Vivian followed closely behind him, her jaw hanging open. What is this? Who are these people? These people, Lord Alexander stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority, are the sovereign vanguard of the Duchy of Oakhaven, and you are standing in the presence of Her Serene Highness, Duchess Eleanor. Victoria let out a shrill, incredulous laugh. Duchess, what absolute rubbish! She's an art restorer from a council estate. I demand you leave my house immediately, before I call MI5. Lord Alexander smoothly reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy embossed diplomatic document, tossing it onto the foyer table. MI5 is fully aware of our presence, Mrs. Pendleton. Under the Diplomatic Privileges Act, Her Highness operates with full sovereign immunity. She could burn this manor to the ground, and local authorities would not have the jurisdiction to intervene. We are here for her property. Eleanor didn't wait for Victoria to process the shock. She locked eyes with her former fiancé. My suitcase, Arthur. Where is it? Arthur swallowed hard, terrified by the heavily armed men and the complete, chilling transformation of the woman he thought he knew. It's upstairs, in the bridal suite. Commander, Eleanor said softly. Clear the route, Commander Harrison barked into his earpiece. Two operatives immediately jogged up the grand staircase. Less than a minute later, they returned carrying Eleanor's small, scuffed suitcase. They laid it at her feet. Eleanor knelt down, unzipped the bag, and reached inside. She pulled out the locked mahogany box. She had the small brass key hidden on a chain around her neck. She unlocked it and opened the lid. Resting on a bed of velvet was the heavy gold signet ring. Lord Alexander stepped forward, taking the ring from her hand. He inspected the crest, a rampant lion, holding an oak branch encrusted with a single, flawless sapphire. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting out a long breath. The royal seal of Beatrice, it is verified. He slipped the ring onto Eleanor's index finger. It fit perfectly. Victoria Pendleton was watching this exchange, her mind racing desperately to calculate the situation. The realization that she had just violently evicted the reigning monarch of a trillion-dollar empire was beginning to set in. Her ruthless corporate mind immediately tried to pivot. Eleanor, Your Highness, Victoria stammered, forcing a horribly fake, strained smile onto her face. Her voice completely lost its venom, replaced by sickening sycophancy. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. The tension of the wedding, the missing diamond. It all got out of hand. We are family. Arthur loves you. Arthur, sensing the monumental shift in power, stepped forward, his eyes pleading. Please, we can fix this. You know I didn't want to throw you out. I was shocked, but we love each other. We can still get married. Eleanor looked at Arthur. She felt entirely empty. The love she had harbored for him felt like a distant memory, belonging to a different person. You didn't throw me out, Arthur, Eleanor said, her voice perfectly level, ringing through the silent foyer. You hid in your room and let your mother's guards drag me through the dirt. You watched them humiliate me. You sold me out for a diamond I didn't steal because you were too much of a coward to stand up to her. Arthur recoiled as if he had been slapped. Eleanor, Do not address her by her first name. Lord Alexander snapped, his eyes flashing with lethal warning. It's fine, Alexander, Eleanor said, raising a hand. She turned her gaze to Victoria and Vivian, who were both suddenly looking extremely nervous. Speaking of the diamond, the Pendleton rose, the £8 million heirloom you claimed I stole to pawn. Water under the bridge, Your Highness, Victoria said quickly, her face pale. A complete misunderstanding. We found the diamond. It was misplaced. No, it wasn't, Eleanor said. She turned to Commander Harrison. Commander, does the Vanguard Cyber Division have access to this estate's localized network? We intercepted their primary servers the moment we entered a 1-mile radius, Your Highness, Harrison replied smoothly. Access the security footage from the Savoy Hotel from last night, Eleanor commanded. Specifically the hallway outside Mrs. Pendleton's suite and the Lancaster ballroom. Victoria's breath hitched. You can't do that. That's a breach of privacy. I am a head of state, Eleanor replied coldly. "I can do whatever I want." Commander Harrison pulled a sleek, military-grade tablet from his tactical vest. He tapped the screen a few times, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard. "Footage acquired, Your Highness," syncing it to the manor's primary display. A massive 85-inch television screen in the adjacent drawing room suddenly flickered to life. The Vanguard had wirelessly hijacked the smart TV. On the screen, crystal-clear 4K security footage from the Savoy played. It showed Victoria Pendleton standing in the hallway outside her suite. She was handing the velvet pouch containing the Pendleton Rose Diamond to her head of security. "Make sure this gets into the Hastings girl's purse during the main course," Victoria's voice echoed through the drawing room speakers, the audio perfectly enhanced by Vanguard tech. "Vivian will cause a distraction. Don't mess this up." The footage then cut to the ballroom. It clearly showed Vivian Wentworth accidentally bumping into Eleanor's chair, blocking Eleanor's view, while the security guard discreetly slipped the velvet pouch into Eleanor's clutch. The drawing room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. Arthur stared at the television screen, his mouth agape. He slowly turned to his mother. You set her up, you framed her." Victoria was trembling, her patrician composure entirely shattered. "Arthur, I did it for us, for the company. She was nothing. She is a reigning duchess." Arthur screamed, his voice cracking with panic and devastation. He looked back at Eleanor, dropping to his knees. "Eleanor, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." "It doesn't matter," Eleanor said, looking down at him with absolute indifference. "You made your choice, Arthur, and I have made mine." She turned to Vivian Wentworth, who was backing away, her face drained of all color, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Vivian," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with ice, "I believe your father owns Wentworth Shipping, does he not?" Vivian nodded, frantically terrified. Yes, Your Highness." "Tell him," Eleanor said smoothly, "that the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Oakhaven is pulling all investments from the European maritime sector, effectively immediately. He has 24 hours to liquidate before his stock crashes to pennies." Vivian let out a choked sob, clapping a hand over her mouth. Eleanor had just bankrupted a billionaire empire with a single sentence. Eleanor then turned her piercing gaze back to Victoria Pendleton, who was clutching the edge of the foyer table to keep from collapsing. "As for Pendleton Holdings," Eleanor continued, "I own half the commercial real estate in Mayfair through Oakhaven Shell Corporations. Starting tomorrow, I am revoking every single lease your company holds. You will be tied up in litigation for the next decade, and you will watch your empire bleed out pound by pound." "You can't," Victoria whispered, tears of sheer panic ruining her mascara. "Please, I beg you." "You begged me to sign a prenup, Victoria," Eleanor replied, her voice unyielding. "You begged me to disappear. I am simply obliging." Eleanor turned her back on the broken family. She didn't look at Arthur, who was weeping on the floor. She didn't look at Victoria, who had collapsed onto the sofa in shock. "We are done here, Lord Alexander," Eleanor said, pulling the cashmere coat tighter around her. "Take me home." "At once, Your Grace." Lord Alexander bowed. The Vanguard operatives formed a tight protective shield around her as she walked out the shattered front doors of the Pendleton estate. She didn't look back as she climbed into the heavily armored Range Rover Sentinel. The rain was still pouring, but inside the vehicle it was warm, quiet, and secure. The convoy turned around, its tires crunching over the ruined wrought iron gates they had torn down. As the vehicles sped away into the Surrey countryside, flanked by the Augusta Westland helicopter overhead, Eleanor looked at the heavy gold signet ring on her finger. The nobody they had thrown into the mud was gone forever. The Queen had arrived. The drive from the Surrey countryside to RAF North Alt, a Royal Air Force station in Greater London, took exactly 42 minutes. Eleanor sat in the back of the armored Range Rover Sentinel, insulated from the chaos she had just unleashed upon the Pendleton family. The heated leather seats and the rhythmic hum of the V8 engine provided a stark contrast to the freezing mud she had been kneeling in just an hour prior. Lord Alexander Cavendish sat across from her, his demeanor shifting from the lethal protector who had breached the Pendleton gates to a patient, deeply respectful advisor. He poured her a cup of Earl Grey tea, from a silver thermos built into the vehicle's console. Your mother, Lord Alexander began softly, anticipating the storm of questions brewing behind Eleanor's stoic expression, was a visionary, but she was also trapped. Oakhaven is a realm built on centuries of tradition, immense wealth, and inevitably suffocating expectations. 22 years ago, your grandfather, Duke Reginald, arranged a marriage for her with a prominent European royal to consolidate our financial holdings. Beatrice refused when she was pushed to the brink. She utilized a network of loyalists, my predecessors, to vanish. Eleanor took a sip of the tea, the warmth finally chasing the chill from her bones. Why didn't she ever tell me? I grew up thinking we were entirely alone in the world. We struggled, Alexander. We clipped coupons. We lived in a damp flat in Chelsea. Lord Alexander's eyes softened with a mixture of sorrow and immense pride, because she knew that if the vanguard found her, our enemies would find her too. Oakhaven's sovereign wealth controls vast sectors of global technology, energy, and real estate. There are factions within the European elite who would have used you as a pawn. She chose poverty over a gilded cage to protect you, Your Highness. She told us to only intervene if her bloodline was in imminent existential danger. The moment you spoke your name and her true title on the protocol line, the vanguard activated. The convoy passed through the heavily guarded gates of RAF North Olt, without stopping, driving straight onto the tarmac where a slate-gray Bombardier Global 7500 private jet sat idling. The aircraft was devoid of any commercial markings, bearing only the discreet gold crest of the Oakhaven Royal House on the tail. As Eleanor boarded the jet, she was greeted by a flight crew who bowed deeply, their eyes lowered in total reverence. She was escorted to the master's suite in the rear of the cabin, where a selection of bespoke clothing somehow tailored perfectly to her measurements based on surveillance the vanguard had conducted over the past 3 years was waiting for her. She stripped off the ruined, mud-stained silk wedding dress, dropping it into a trash bin without a second glance. After a long, scalding shower, she changed into a sharply tailored navy cashmere suit. When she emerged into the main cabin, the jet was already cruising at 40,000 feet over the English Channel. "We are 90 minutes from Oakhaven airspace, Your Highness," Commander Harrison reported, offering a slight bow. When they finally broke through the clouds, Eleanor looked out the window and saw her birthright. The sovereign duchy of Oakhaven was a breathtaking hidden jewel nestled high in the Alpine valleys, bordering the Mediterranean basin. It was a flawless fusion of ancient architecture and hyper-modern infrastructure. Medieval castles sat atop cliffs connected by sleek, glass-enclosed bullet trains. Below, a deep-water harbor was filled with super yachts and naval patrol vessels. The jet touched down at a private airstrip carved directly into the side of a mountain. A motorcade was waiting to escort her to the Grand Palais, a colossal, sprawling estate of white marble, gold leaf, and centuries-old tapestries. As Eleanor walked through the vast, echoing halls of the palace flanked by lines of vanguard guards, in full ceremonial dress, she felt the weight of a trillion-dollar empire settling onto her shoulders. She was led to the Duke's study, a massive room lined with rare books, Renaissance paintings, and a massive mahogany desk. Resting on the desk was a leather-bound dossier. "The state of your empire." "Your Grace," Lord Alexander said, stepping into the room, "and as per your earlier directives regarding Pendleton Holdings and Wentworth Shipping, the execution orders are ready for your signature." Eleanor walked behind the desk and sat in the heavy leather chair. She looked at the signet ring on her finger, the sapphire glinting in the afternoon light. She picked up the solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. "Execute them," she said coldly. The financial slaughter of the Pendleton and Wentworth families did not happen overnight. It happened over the course of 72 agonizing, chaotic hours. Eleanor's vengeance was not chaotic or loud. It was surgical, precise, and absolute. In the city of London, panic erupted at the headquarters of Wentworth Shipping when the markets opened on Monday morning. The sovereign wealth fund of Oakhaven, operating through dozens of opaque shell companies in Geneva, and the Cayman Islands began dumping every single share, bond, and debt obligation they held in the maritime sector. The sheer volume of the sell-off triggered an algorithmic panic across global trading platforms. Within 4 hours, Wentworth shipping stock plummeted by 74%. Vivian's father, a loud, aggressive billionaire accustomed to bullying his way out of trouble, found himself completely powerless. When he attempted to secure emergency bridge loans from the Bank of England, his requests were mysteriously denied. Oakhaven had quietly called in favors at the highest levels of global finance. By Wednesday evening, Wentworth Shipping was forced to file for administration. The Wentworth family was wiped out, relegated from billionaires to desperate debtors in less than a week. Vivian, who had mocked Eleanor's modest background, was photographed by the paparazzi, weeping outside her Chelsea townhouse as liquidators arrived to seize her assets. But the destruction of Pendleton Holdings was a far more intimate, agonizing affair. Victoria Pendleton had spent 3 decades building a reputation as the untouchable queen of London real estate. She believed her wealth made her a god. But against a sovereign state, a corporation is merely a fragile paper boat in a hurricane. Eleanor made good on her promise. Pendleton Holdings leased over 40% of their premium commercial properties in Mayfair and Kensington from a mysterious consortium known as the Aegis Group. On Tuesday morning, Victoria received a hand-delivered courier package at the Surrey estate. It contained termination notices for every single lease, citing obscure but legally ironclad clauses buried deep within the original contracts. Furthermore, Oakhaven's legal division launched a blitzkrieg of 50 separate lawsuits against Pendleton Holdings, accusing them of environmental violations, contract breaches, and corporate malfeasance. Victoria called an emergency board meeting. She stood at the head of the long mahogany table, looking at the terrified faces of her directors. "We fight this," Victoria snarled, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "We hire the best barristers in London. We countersue for breach of contract." The chief financial officer, a balding man sweating profusely, shook his head. "Mrs. Pendleton, you don't understand. Aegis Group isn't a normal corporate rival. They have invoked diplomatic immunity on all land holdings under the Sovereign State Act. We can't sue them. They aren't bound by British corporate law. They are acting as an extension of the Oakhaven Crown." Victoria's blood ran cold. "Eleanor," she whispered, "the board has convened without you prior to this meeting." "Victoria," the chairman interrupted, his voice tight. "The share price has halved. Our credit lines are frozen. Because of your personal indiscretions with the new Duchess of Oakhaven, you have destroyed this firm. The board demands your immediate resignation as CEO. If you do not step down, we will publicly oust you and vote to seize your personal shares to cover the litigation costs." Victoria collapsed into her chair, the air leaving her lungs. The empire she had murdered, blackmailed, and lied for was being ripped from her hands, all because she couldn't tolerate a girl in an off-the-rack dress. Meanwhile, Arthur's descent was purely psychological. He had spent the days following Eleanor's departure in a state of catatonic shock. He tried calling her phone incessantly, only to receive a pre-recorded message stating the number was disconnected. He drove to the small flat in London, where she used to live, only to find it completely empty, scrubbed clean of any evidence that Eleanor had ever existed. Arthur finally understood what he had lost. Eleanor hadn't just been a beautiful girl. She had been the only real, authentic, uncorrupted thing in his entire life. And when the defining moment of his life arrived, the moment to prove his love and protect her, he had chosen the comfort of his mother's money over doing what was right. Arthur attempted one final, desperate maneuver. He chartered a private plane to Geneva, planning to cross the border into Oakhaven to beg for an audience. He didn't even make it past customs. As soon as he presented his British passport at the border checkpoint, 2 towering Vanguard operatives stepped out of the security office. They didn't draw weapons, but their mere presence was terrifying. "Mr. Pendleton," one of the operatives said, holding Arthur's passport just out of reach, "you have been designated as a hostile entity by the Crown. You are permanently banned from entering the sovereign duchy of Oakhaven. I just need 5 minutes with her, Arthur pleaded, ignoring the stares of the wealthy tourists around him. Just tell her Arthur is here, please. The operative looked at him with absolute disdain. Her Grace does not know anyone by that name. If you attempt to cross this border again, you will be detained under the State Security Act. The operative tossed the passport onto the floor at Arthur's feet. Go home to your mother, little boy. Arthur sank to his knees in the middle of the terminal, weeping as the reality of his cowardice finally broke him. 6 months later, the Cathedral of St. Jude, a breathtaking 12th-century Gothic masterpiece situated at the very pinnacle of Oakhaven's capital, was bathed in the golden light of a crisp alpine morning. The air inside the cavernous sanctuary was thick with the ancient, heady scent of burning frankincense and myrrh. High above, suspended in the vaulted stone ceilings, the soaring harmonies of a 200-piece choral syndicate echoed, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that had welcomed Oakhaven monarchs for a millennia. This was not merely a ceremony, it was a global demonstration of absolute, unyielding power. The pews of the cathedral were filled with the most influential figures on the planet. Prime ministers, presidents, tech billionaires, and the highest-ranking members of the Japanese, Spanish, and Monegasque royal families sat in reverent silence. They had all come to pay their respects to the new ruler of the sovereign duchy of Oakhaven, a trillion-dollar empire that quietly pulled the strings of global finance. The massive iron-reinforced oak doors of the cathedral slowly swung outward, protesting with a heavy, metallic groan. The choir's voices swelled to a triumphant crescendo. Eleanor stepped over the threshold, beginning her long walk down the crimson carpet of the central aisle. She was completely unrecognizable from the desperate, weeping girl who had been thrown into the freezing mud of a Surrey driveway just 6 months prior. Today, she did not wear a ruined, off-the-rack silk dress. She wore the traditional, devastatingly heavy ceremonial garments of her ancient bloodline, a sweeping, midnight blue velvet cape, lined with immaculate winter ermine, trailed 15 feet behind her, carried by 6 young noblewomen of the duchy. Her gown was spun from threads of platinum and deep blue silk, intricately embroidered with the crest of the rampant lion and the oak branch. Resting upon her head was the sovereign diadem of Oakhaven, a staggering, towering crown, forged from solid platinum and encrusted with over 400 flawless diamonds centered around a legendary 50-carat sapphire that glowed like a captured star. As she walked, her face was a mask of perfect, impenetrable, regal authority. She did not smile. She did not waver. She walked with the immense, heavy grace of a woman who had been forged in the cruelest fires of betrayal and had emerged as unbreakable steel. She remembered the rain. She remembered the laughter of Vivian Wentworth and the venom of Victoria Pendleton. But those memories felt like they belonged to a ghost. The girl who loved Arthur was dead. The Duchess of Oakhaven had taken her place. At the high altar, the Archbishop of Oakhaven, an elderly, venerable man in robes of gold, raised a vial of consecrated holy oil. He anointed her forehead, her hands, and finally placed the ancient, solid gold sovereign scepter into her right hand. By the grace of the Almighty and the blood of the ancients, I present unto you your undeniable ruler. The Archbishop's voice boomed over the cathedral's acoustics. Long live the Duchess, long live the Duchess. Yeah. The congregation roared in absolute unison. The sound breached the thick stone walls of the cathedral, echoing out into the cobblestone streets of the capital, where hundreds of thousands of Oakhaven citizens cheered, waving flags of blue and gold. Hours later, the sun dipped below the snow-capped alpine peaks, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and crimson. After enduring the endless diplomatic reception, the forced smiles and the calculated handshakes of foreign dignitaries, Eleanor finally retreated to the private, highly secure wing of the Grand Palais. She stood alone in her massive oak-paneled study, A roaring fire crackled in the colossal marble fireplace. She had removed the heavy velvet cape, but the platinum crown still rested upon her head, a physical reminder of the insurmountable chasm between her and the rest of the world. The heavy door to the study opened with a soft click. Lord Alexander Cavendish stepped into the room, bowing deeply, his ceremonial sword clinking against his polished boots. "A flawless ceremony, Your Grace," Lord Alexander murmured, his voice filled with genuine paternal pride. "The world officially recognizes your authority. The markets have stabilized, and the transition of power is complete." "Thank you, Alexander," Eleanor said softly, turning away from the floor-to-ceiling windows to face him. Her expression hardened the warmth, leaving her eyes. "Has the final piece of business been arranged?" "Yes, Your Grace," Lord Alexander replied, his posture straightening. "They were flown in under the cover of darkness. They have been waiting in the lower holding chambers for 4 hours." "Bring them up." 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the study opened once more. 4 Vanguard guards clad in their lethal tactical black marched into the room. Flanked between them were 2 figures who looked as though they had just crawled out of a nightmare. Victoria Pendleton was a ghost of the terrifying matriarch she had once been. Her previously immaculate salon-styled hair was limp and unkempt, streaked with dull gray. Her designer clothes hung loosely on a frame that had grown frail and gaunt from months of relentless stress. The arrogant, untouchable fire in her eyes had been completely extinguished, replaced by the hollow, frantic stare of a hunted animal. Arthur stood beside her, looking even worse. He was unshaven, his shoulders slumped in permanent defeat. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark, bruised circles of exhaustion. The financial slaughter Eleanor had orchestrated had been absolute. Pendleton Holdings had officially declared bankruptcy 4 months ago. The bank had seized the sprawling Surrey estate, liquidating the antique furniture, the artwork, and the luxury cars. Victoria and Arthur had been evicted and were currently living in a damp, rented 2-bedroom flat in Croydon. The high society friends who had once clamored for Victoria's approval had instantly abandoned them. Treating the Pendleton name like an infectious disease, Eleanor moved to the high-backed leather chair behind her massive mahogany desk and sat down. She rested her chin on her steepled fingers, the massive sapphire on her signet ring catching the firelight. "Your Highness," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking horribly. Her knees buckled. The former Queen of London high society collapsed onto the intricate Persian rug. Kneeling before the very girl she had ordered her security guards to throw into the mud. "Please, I am begging you. We have lost everything. The company is gone. The house is gone. Our reputation is destroyed. We have absolutely nothing left. We are destitute. We eat scraps. Please, I beg for your mercy." Arthur finally looked up, tears spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the dirt on his cheeks. "Eleanor, please, I'm sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry. I loved you. I was just too weak. I was a coward. Please, you've ruined us. Just let us go. End this torment." Eleanor looked at them for a long, suffocatingly silent minute. She searched her heart for any lingering trace of anger, any spark of vindictive joy, or even a shred of pity. She found absolutely nothing. They were just pests, insects buzzing against the reinforced glass of her new reality. "I did not have my vanguard bring you here to gloat, Victoria," Eleanor said, her voice terrifyingly smooth, echoing with absolute detachment. "I brought you here to finalize a corporate transaction." Eleanor picked up a thick, meticulously bound legal document from her desk and slid it across the polished mahogany. What is this?" Victoria asked, her hands shaking violently as she pulled herself up just enough to look at the embossed cover of the file. "It is a buyout agreement," Eleanor explained coldly. "When Pendleton Holdings went into final administration, a shadow private equity firm swept in and bought your remaining debts, your intellectual property, and your corporate trademarks for pennies on the pound. I am the sole proprietor of that firm." Victoria gasped, clapping a trembling hand over her mouth. "I now own the name Pendleton. Eleanor continued, her voice rising with quiet, lethal authority. I own your family crest. I own the rights to your historical brand. And yesterday morning I legally liquidated it all. The Pendleton name has been entirely erased from the British corporate registry. It no longer exists. Why? Arthur choked out, dropping to his knees beside his weeping mother. You've already won. You took everything. Why drag us across the continent just to tell us this? Eleanor stood up slowly. She walked around the massive desk, her velvet gown sweeping silently across the floor until she was standing mere inches away from Arthur. He instinctively shrank back, terrified of the imposing vanguard guards whose hands rested on their holstered weapons. Because, Eleanor whispered, her tone dropping to a chillingly quiet octave, 6 months ago in the bridal suite of your estate, you tried to force me to sign a document that would erase my existence from your life. You handed me a non-disclosure agreement and a cashier's check to disappear like a straight dog. Eleanor reached into the pocket of her gown. She produced a sleek black checkbook. With fluid, practiced grace, she uncapped a gold Mont Blanc fountain pen, signed her name, tore the check from the binding, and let it flutter through the air. It landed gently on the Persian rug, right at Victoria's trembling knees. That is a check for exactly £100,000, Eleanor stated, looking down at them. It is enough for you to buy a miserable tiny house in a forgotten corner of the countryside and live out the rest of your pathetic lives in absolute obscurity. You will sign the non-disclosure agreement attached to that buyout file. You will never speak of me, of Oakhaven, or of your former wealth to anyone ever again. If you violate this single condition, my vanguard will not be as gentle as they were when they took your iron gates off their hinges. Victoria stared at the piece of paper on the floor. It was the ultimate shattering insult. The perfect, mirrored reflection of her own cruelty, handed back to her with inescapable finality. Sign the paper, Victoria, Lord Alexander commanded from the shadows, his voice cracking like a whip. With shaking, defeated hands, Victoria Pendleton picked up the gold pen Eleanor had left on the edge of the desk. Weeping uncontrollably, she signed the document permanently, signing away the last shreds of her dignity and legacy. She clutched the check to her chest, her head bowed to the floor. Get them out of my sight, Eleanor ordered immediately, turning her back on them and walking toward the roaring fire. She listened to the humiliating sounds of their departure, the shuffling of Arthur's scuffed shoes, the choked, broken sobs of Victoria, and the crisp, synchronized marching of the vanguard guards dragging them away. The heavy oak doors clicked shut with a resounding thud, plunging the study back into a serene, powerful silence. Eleanor closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of the wood smoke and the crisp, alpine air. The crushing weight of the past was finally gone, completely washed away by the immense, undeniable reality of her present. She wasn't an art restorer anymore. She wasn't a broken-hearted bride left in the rain. She was Eleanor, Duchess of Oakhaven, and her reign had only just begun. Eleanor's journey from a discarded, humiliated bride to the absolute ruler of a trillion-dollar empire proves that karma doesn't just bite. Sometimes it arrives in a convoy of armored vehicles. What did you think of Arthur's ultimate betrayal? And was Eleanor's surgical revenge against the Pendleton family justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this epic tale of betrayal, hidden royalty, and satisfying vengeance, don't forget to like, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas and jaw-dropping plot twists every single week.